A man staggers down the garbage-laden street. Men and women clothed in rags lie on the sidewalk as he pushes forward through a sea of semi-conscious drug addicts standing stooped, arms down by their sides like zombies. The man stops and talks to a friend. His legs are covered in infected pustules. To his side, a woman lies unconscious, looking all but dead, blood running down her bandaged left leg where a flesh-eating condition has caused a gaping hole. This is addiction at its very worst, and it is the epitome of 21st century drug-related civil disorder. The scene is just a regular day in the American heart of urban squalor, a sight unimaginable when the U.S. kicked off its war on drugs decades ago. Today, we'll cover all of the most addictive drugs, including the terrifying ones that have led to the description you just heard. We'll try to get our heads around what has happened with drugs in the USA, the most addicted country on the planet, which, as you'll see, is home to some disturbing statistics, along with those ultra-dystopian city streets. Coming in at number 5 is alcohol, also known as booze, brew, juice, hooch, sauce, firewater, and liquid courage, which can get you drunk, wasted, wrecked, smashed, trashed, hammered, plastered, battered, blasted, sloshed, trolleyed, and our favorite of the British expressions, absolutely wankered. Booze is, of course, legal, but it's still a drug, and an extremely addictive one at that. Alcohol addicts are everywhere you look. According to studies, 50 to 60% of Americans aged 21 to 64 are regular consumers. 31.5% of American people aged 18 to 21 are drinkers, as are 14.5% of people aged 16 and 17, 4.7% of 14 and 15-year-olds, and shockingly, even 1.6% of 12 and 13-year-olds. 29.5 million, or 10.5% of all Americans aged 12 and older, qualify for what's called alcohol use disorder. 17.3 million of them males and 12.3 million female. That is a lot of addiction. The National Institute on Alcohol and Alcoholism wrote that each year there are around 178,000 booze-related deaths in the U.S., about 120,000 male deaths, and 59,000 female deaths. Around the world, over 3 million people a year die because of alcohol abuse, or about 5.3% of all global deaths. In people aged 20 to 39 years, close to 13.5% of total deaths in the world are attributable to alcohol. Alcohol is deadly, but in small amounts it gives you a nice dopamine hit, causing relaxation and reducing social inhibition. Hence the term Dutch courage, relating to Dutch soldiers drinking before going into battle. The calming effect is down to something called gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA, an inhibitory neurotransmitter that blocks specific signals to your central nervous system. In layman's terms, it helps you chill out, lessening anxiety, stress, and fear. It's always good to be calmed down, but booze does a lot more than that in the brain, and the results aren't always positive. It literally makes you stupid. And stupid people do stupid things, as can be seen in just about any city in the world on a Saturday night. Alcohol affects a part of the brain called the cerebellum, which is vital for motor skills, hence why drinking makes walking or driving difficult, especially if you've had a lot. That rush of dopamine also affects the brain's prefrontal cortex, our so-called executive suite associated with self-control, decision-making, and restraint. Have you ever woken up after a crazy night out and discovered you spent all your rent money? That's a result of your prefrontal cortex not working as it should. But it also leads to a 40% to 360% increase in dopamine activity, which also means that people use it to self-medicate, making it especially addictive to people with issues like PTSD, anxiety, or depression. In fact, 22% of people who drink in the world will develop a dependence, and for many of them, it's a way to deal with the psychological issues. Even so, the vast majority of people in the world can control their drinking. It's an ongoing debate if there's a safe limit as to how much you can drink. But people, for the most part, will drink with friends, have a glass of wine at home, watch sports with a couple of beers, drink some champagne at weddings, and it won't kill them or lead to an arrest. But for those who do become addicted and try to quit, they quickly find the most insidious aspect of alcohol addiction: the withdrawal symptoms. And these can be severe, arguably the very worst of all drug withdrawal symptoms. Putting all that alcohol inside you has affected how your central nervous system works, and because it has a depressant effect on your body, the body tries hard to keep you awake or alert while on booze. When you suddenly quit drinking, the body is still in this ramped up mode, so you can feel very wired, and you start to shake and feel severe anxiety. And these are the mild symptoms. Those in the grips of severe symptoms can start to hallucinate, possibly talking to people who aren't even there, or brushing spiders off their body. This might happen within the first 2 days of stopping, and the nightmare can get much worse. About 5% of people will have what are called delirium tremens, or DTs, after the initial anxiety. The person will become extremely agitated. In a medical setting, they may have to be strapped down so as to not hurt themselves or someone else. Their hallucinations can be so vivid that they barely see the people around them. Instead, they might be looking at snakes or some other frightening apparition. In the early 20th century, the condition would sometimes be called seeing pink elephants. This can be very frightening, not to mention dangerous. According to a 2022 research paper, the mortality rate for DTs is between 5 and 15% when the person gets treatment, but around 37% when they don't. Coming off alcohol dependency is serious business. Ironically, one of the drugs that doctors will give to people to counteract the dangerous symptoms of alcohol withdrawal is a drug that can cause similar withdrawal symptoms after long-term use, resulting in what sufferers have called a living nightmare. Welcome to benzo hell. Unlike alcohol, benzodiazepines, or benzos, are prescribed by doctors, although they're also sold on the streets. But as you'll soon see, the street versions, which are oftentimes counterfeit, can be dangerously contaminated. For decades, society and much of the medical world seem to ignore or underestimate just how dangerous and terrifying benzos could be when they're stopped abruptly. And taking one of those so-called chill pills with brand names such as Xanax, Klonopin, Valium, or Ativan is often talked about in a lighthearted way in the movies or on TV. But chill pills, in fact, are not to be messed with. Like alcohol, they work on the GABA system, so indeed they chill you out. But also, like alcohol, your body gets used to being in chill mode. So when you stop and you have a dependence, your body keeps trying to make you switched on. You become tremendously wired, maybe not sleeping for days on end, unable to do anything except be wired and panic. You get rebound anxiety for the anxiety you'd been trying to prevent. You can become so worked up that it leads to seizures that can kill you. We visited a benzo withdrawal forum online, and there are many reports of people having seizures, and lots of people lose their minds to the point of a complete nervous breakdown. Many lose their partners, their jobs, their savings, everything. Benzos used to be handed out like candy by doctors who underestimated just how serious withdrawal could be. What's now referred to as benzodiazepine withdrawal syndrome. Thankfully, today doctors will not usually prescribe benzos for weeks unless it's absolutely necessary. It's hard to say how long it takes to form a dependency, though. Everyone is different. It could be months, or it could be just weeks of daily use. The pills themselves can be lifesavers for panickers or insomniacs. They're incredibly effective at calming a person down, but this leads to people taking them when not absolutely necessary. They might then become tolerant, so they increase the dose, or their doctor does. We visited a lot of forums to research this video, and reading what people say about benzo withdrawal is enough to turn anyone off from ever taking them. People talked about chemical brain damage that even years after stopping, they said, still made their lives difficult. Others discussed their paralyzing anxiety during withdrawal, or feeling like bugs crawling on their skin, the night terrors, their tremors, their inability to barely speak, having body spasms, hallucinations, psychosis, mania, paranoia, derealization, depression, intractable insomnia, and for one person what he described as an incredible Hulk rage. Another person, a self-confessed lifelong recreational drug taker, called benzos the most dangerous drug I've ever taken. According to the U.S. National Institutes of Health, 30.6 million American adults, or 12.6% of the population, use benzodiazepines. 25.3 million, or 10.4%, take them as prescribed by their physician, and 5.3 million, or 2.2%, misuse them. And the highest incident of misuse falls into the 18 to 25 years of age category. In Scotland, according to the BBC, there was so much misuse that it was dubbed a Valium crisis. In 2019, the BBC published a story with the headline, "Street Valium Blamed for Unprecedented Spike in Drug Deaths." The so-called street blues were selling for pennies, since traffickers were producing so many. Some of them were coming from China, something we'll get to later. In 2023, an Australian newspaper wrote the headline, "Common Anti-Anxiety Meds Turning Australians into Accidental Addicts." Usage in Australia over the last 20 years has shot up, with 1.4 million Australians being prescribed 5.1 million scripts of these chill pills from 2020 to 2021. The same article said that since these are prescribed by the doctor, people don't see themselves as becoming drug addicts, and that The proportion of accidental overdose deaths due to benzodiazepines has doubled in the past 20 years, up 32.5% in 2021. As with another kind of drug we'll talk about, some of the blame for the benzo crisis lies with doctors and pharmaceutical companies who might endorse the use of benzos when it's not always medically necessary. The benzodiazepine market was worth $2.35 billion in 2022 and is expected to reach $3.1 billion by 2032. These pills can be a lifesaver, but they can also be a life ruiner. And behind both are people profiting who don't care either way. This puts benzos high on the most addictive drugs in the world. And the next drug, while not as dangerous in terms of withdrawal symptoms, is even harder to kick. Like alcohol, nicotine is legal, and smokers consume about 5 trillion cigarettes a year, costing about $2 trillion in economic damage, but making a whole lot of people very, very wealthy. In 2024, the global tobacco market generated a revenue of almost $1 trillion and is expected to increase by another $130.2 billion by 2029. That's why you won't be seeing an end to the tobacco business anytime soon. According to the WHO, there are around 1.3 billion smokers in the world, with around 1.1 billion using cigarettes as their fix, and the rest using various other kinds of tobacco products. The legal age for which you can buy cigarettes or other tobacco products differs depending on the country. In the US, you have to be 21 after being raised from 18 in 2019. In the UK, it was 16 for many years, but that changed in 2007 when it went up to 18. Most of the world, 18 is the magic number, although there are about 50 million smokers on the planet who are 13 to 15. The CDC in the US said in 2023, nearly 2 of every 100 high school students, 1.9%, reported that they had smoked cigarettes in the past 30 days. 1 out of 100 middle school students had given it a go at least once in the past month, too. The CDC added 15 of every 100 middle school students, 14.7%, and nearly 28 of every 100 high school students, 27.9%, said they had ever tried a tobacco product in their lifetime. The same report said 9 out of 10 US adults had tried smoking at least once in their life. Considering the dangers, this isn't good news. Still, things now are a lot different from how they were in the past. Some of you out there will remember a time when smoking was pervasive. You went to a restaurant, a bar, or a pub, and the place was full of people smoking cigarettes. People smoked at the office. On planes, you went to the smoking part that was divided from the non-smoking part by a curtain. Former cabin staff have said the smoke was sometimes so thick that they couldn't see enough to carry out the in-flight service. And it was even worse in the decades before that. In the 1930s, American Tobacco, the maker of Lucky Strikes, used doctors in their ad campaigns to sell their cigarettes. 20,679 physicians say Luckies are less irritating to the throat, said a doctor in one ad. And believe it or not, that was an improvement over times in the past. In 1890, an ad for Dr. Batty's asthma cigarettes said their brand helped sufferers of asthma, hay fever, head colds, diseases of the throat, and bronchial issues. That's like saying lard aids weight loss. The company did at least state that kids under 6 shouldn't smoke. After all, they might stick a lit one in their eye. In the 1930s, 50 to 60% of American men and 5 to 10% of women smoked. The number of male smokers was around the same in the 1940s, although around 20% of women smoked. Smoking had been viewed as somewhat unladylike at the start of the 20th century, but thanks in part to Edward Bernays, now known as the father of public relations, and his marketing campaign to show strong women smoking, so-called torches of freedom, the number of female smokers increased. Smoking had attached itself to the growing feminist movement. It was a similar story for men, who were subliminally informed that smoking was a tough guy thing. Eric Lawson, one of the Marlboro men, died at the age of 72 from respiratory failure due to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. In 1965, about 52% of American men smoked and 34% of American women were smokers. But at the end of the 60s, the Mad Men-style marketing campaigns were less effective with all the studies on smoking and cancer, and the decade ended with about 44% of men and 31% of women being smokers. Still, despite all the warnings, by 1987, around 29% of US adults smoked, 32% being men, 27% women. So close to equality. The numbers gradually decreased with bans on smoking and anti-smoking campaigns until we arrived at the adult smoking rate in the US of 14% of men and 11% of women at the start of the 2020s. People know it's bad. but it's still highly addictive, so they keep on doing it. It's estimated that every year around 8 million people die prematurely due to smoking. Researchers say it'll likely kill 1 billion people over the course of the 21st century. While smokers don't seem to be getting high, that doesn't mean it's not addictive. It actually increases dopamine levels in your brain's reward system by about 25 to 40%. If you've ever been to an airport and seen a smoking room, the toxic, coughing human zoos that can be depressing enough to make smokers think twice about their so-called dirty habit, you'll see that people can't seem to go very long without a smoke. Prolonged nicotine use causes cravings. While you might not think you get high from lighting up, you do, which is why it's so hard to quit. According to the CDC, in 2015, a massive 68% of American smokers said they wanted to quit. In 2018, 55% said they tried, but only 7.5% said they were successful. Smoking is notoriously easy to start, but very hard to stop. So, is it addictive? Of course it is. People know there's a high chance of it ending their life early, not to mention causing a grocery list of possible health problems, including cancer, heart disease, lung disease, to name just a few. Yet they still do it. Okay, now it's time to talk about the hard hitters, the drugs that can take over your life, chew you up, spit you out, and throw you into a street somewhere in the USA's heart of urban darkness. In the number 2 spot are the stimulants. We're going to focus more on cocaine than on amphetamines and methamphetamines, though neurologically speaking, they both have similar actions, which is to create a dopamine and noradrenaline tsunami in your brain. They both speed up messages in your brain, affecting the sympathetic and central nervous systems, causing arousal, alertness, and giving you energy. It could also result in you talking for 3 nonstop hours about how much you loved your pet hamster when you were in middle school. It's thought there are around 22 million cocaine users around the world right now, with as many as 1.5 million regular users in the US, and experts say we're doing more coke than ever. In the UK, where groups of men and women are often seen bunched in toilet stalls together on a night out, there is coke in the sewage water. Scientists said in 2015 that London sewage had the highest cocaine concentrations in the whole of Europe. We kid you not, a marine biologist in Britain in 2024 said there is so much contamination in the sea around Britain that the crabs are on cocaine and the shrimp are on speed, which could affect their behavior and upset the natural ecological system. Traces of coke were even found in the Houses of Parliament bathrooms, just as various politicians were talking about getting tough on drugs. Coke is truly everywhere. The Global Report on Cocaine 2023 said coca cultivation rose 35% from 2020 to 2021. Seizures of cocaine hit record levels at about 2,300 tons, and it's believed only 20 to 25% of the coke that is shipped gets seized at some point. Most of it hits the streets where it can be cut with something, and so grown in size but become weaker, sometimes to the point of it containing hardly any cocaine at all. Some British coke that was tested in a lab not too long ago had only a 10% purity, but Channel 5 News in 2019 reported that the purity of cocaine in Britain has risen from an average of 20% to 80% in just 10 years. Unlike methamphetamine, the drug that powered so many soldiers during World War II, cocaine has not been demonized as much, making it seem more acceptable in society. Meth is often viewed as kinda trashy, while coke has throughout the decades been linked to Wall Street traders, Hollywood movie stars, high-powered sales executives, and people who can't wait to tell you about their screenplay. In short, snorting rails is not too taboo, which doesn't help where growing consumption rates are concerned. Data from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development said about 2.4% of Americans had done coke from 2022 to 2023. What may come as a surprise to many of you is the same report said 2.5% of Spaniards had done cocaine that year, as had 2.5% of Austrians, 2.7% of British people, and at the top was Australia at 4.2% of the population. The US used to be the king of coke, but things are changing. As you'll soon see, there's a perfectly rational explanation for this. It's believed that about 1/5 of cocaine users will develop a dependency at some point, which can get very, very expensive. In terms of it killing you outright in one sitting, chances are very low, although a 2018 study of people having heart attacks under 50 showed that 6% had coke in their system. Correlation is not causation, but it can still count for something. A paper published by the National Institutes of Health explained, cocaine users are at a 7-fold risk for myocardial infarction compared to non-users. The study found 6% of emergency room patients treated for chest pain had a cocaine-induced myocardial infarction. Unlike powder coke, Its freebase form crack seems to have become a bit more taboo, even though essentially users just want the same thing, rushes of dopamine and adrenaline. Both forms can be incredibly hard to quit. Overdoses might be uncommon, but with crack and regular cocaine, the euphoria a person experiences can start to produce profound cravings. If a user quits, he or she likely won't suffer psychosis or seizures, as someone with alcohol or a benzo addiction might, but they will feel very uncomfortable and the cravings will be intense. People sometimes do so much they suffer from septum perforation. Their nose collapses. It's also highly psychologically addictive. Just ask rapper Flavor Flav, who said he used to spend $2,600 a day on crack and did so for 6 straight years. That comes to $5,694,000. And kicking that habit is hard. A paper in the U.S. National Library of Medicine written on the topic of cocaine withdrawal listed the symptoms as depressed mood, psychomotor agitation, psychomotor retardation, craving for cocaine, insomnia, and vivid unpleasant dreams. And yet, cocaine use is increasing all over the world. As demand remains high, farmers and traffickers from South America will keep making and selling it. That means more cocaine-related violent deaths. A recent article in a Dutch media website said 4 out of 5 assassinations in the Netherlands were linked to cocaine trafficking. In Europe, traffickers from Balkan countries now work with Latin American cartels, which is one reason why Europe has seen so much more cocaine use in recent years. In the Belgian port of Antwerp, authorities seized 116 metric tons of cocaine in 2023, a new record. Dutch customs seized about 60 metric tons that year, up almost a fifth from 2022. The DEA says these often extremely violent Balkan gangs leave the USA alone only because the Mexican cartels have pretty much sewn things up in the North American coke market. Because of the mafias in Europe, coke has steadily been getting purer and cheaper. According to the EU's Home Affairs Commissioner, it also means drug-related killings have started to rival terrorism. And all this is just so some guys in a toilet stall can get a dopamine rush so they can brag about how great they are. In short, coke is extremely addictive. Otherwise, the world wouldn't be seeing mini wars in the streets over it. But this next drug has turned the streets in the USA into what looks like something not from a war, but from a horror movie. "It's my wife and it's my life," sang the band The Velvet Underground in their song Heroin. The singer Lou Reed, then a heroin addict, talked about heroin taking him to a place where he just didn't care about a thing in the world. Heroin was his fix for all of life's problems. That's what heroin does. It makes all your problems go away while you're in the throes of the high. Unlike speed or coke or LSD, which aren't everyone's cup of tea because they can be too intense, heroin's soft landing into a bed of feathers can be an easy fall, provided the amount consumed isn't too much. This is what makes it the most addictive drug of all. It seemingly cures everything until it destroys everything. Former users often say heroin usually takes back 10 times what it gives. There are no free rides in life, and heroin exemplifies this to the extreme. In 1898, the German company Bayer & Co. introduced heroin to the world's drug market as a pain reliever and a cough suppressant. They said it was a remedy for many of life's common conditions. This seems ridiculous to us now, but you'll see in a few minutes how pharmaceutical firms tried something similar in the 21st century. Since heroin was introduced, it's been the go-to fix for artists, rock bands, and poets, and often traumatized hordes of the world's meanest streets. For many years, it was perhaps the most demonized drug of them all. Heroin, unlike cocaine, was often associated with being down and out. It tore families apart and it made people do anything for their fix, even though the withdrawal symptoms are not as bad or as dangerous as benzos and alcohol. One of the major problems with demonizing drugs has always been the fact that not telling the truth about them can lead to younger people not understanding the dangers or never believing adults because they were lied to about drugs. Your brain on drugs is not a fried egg. Heroin is supposed to feel good. After all, it ups your dopamine levels by about 200%. You might now be wondering, if both heroin and cocaine lead to the release of dopamine, why are they so different? Most recreational drugs, in fact, release more dopamine than is usually made in the brain, but they don't all produce the same feelings. Heroin converts to morphine in the brain, and it binds very rapidly to opioid receptors. Opioid receptors play a big role in regulating pain. Once activated, they inhibit pain signals in the brain and the spinal cord. That's why opioids are used in medical settings. The feeling is usually a surge of warmth, described as a rush. This usually comes with euphoria and drowsiness, but it can also make people quite upbeat and chatty, especially in lower doses. The pain it fixes for many people is also emotional pain. Heroin often becomes not a social drug, but something people do in the privacy of their own home, or their cardboard box or toilet cubicles at work. In higher doses, people can gouge out and nod off, which looks like them falling asleep while sitting up, perhaps falling forward over their keyboard at work and suddenly jolting back. The high can also result in the release of histamines, which is why heroin users tend to scratch a lot. To the advanced user, it's pretty obvious who's on heroin. Scratching is a giveaway, as are small pupils, nodding off at work, or sometimes being overly and insincerely friendly or glib. But the use of opiates at lower levels might not seem to have much of an outward effect on the user at all, which is why so many functional addicts hold down jobs and go about their lives normally and remain on the drug for many years, with hardly anyone knowing. You can look very normal on opiates, as is often the case for millions of Americans on prescription opiates. It's when you don't have them or do too much of them that makes people look like the so-called junkies. Tolerance can quickly develop with heroin, which means the body gets used to it, and so a higher dose is needed. Addicts often talk about chasing the first high, which they will never attain again. Heroin slowly rewires the brain. You start to need the heroin because the brain adapts to all that unearned dopamine being produced. Once addicted, they often say they take their heroin just to avoid getting sick. The withdrawal is physically very uncomfortable, but not as dangerous as coming off of booze or benzos. A woman told The Times, "It's like a demon crawling out of you. You'd rather just die and be done with it than go through that." And even if you do get through the 5 or so days of physical withdrawal, 2 or 3 intense days, your brain that got used to the heroin doesn't make as much dopamine anymore, so you can feel incredibly depressed. Dependence like this doesn't happen overnight. Users often have to do it daily for several weeks to form a dependence, although for some people it can take as little as 2 weeks. One of the biggest problems, evident in the fact that 1,106,900 U.S. residents died from overdoses from 1968 to 2020, is that it's not always easy to control how much of a dose you take. As little as 5 times over a safe dose can kill you, and street heroin can be maybe 10% or 90% pure. You just don't know what you're getting. The vast majority of fatal drug overdoses in the U.S. involve an opiate. In 2023, 295 Americans died every single day due to drugs, and most of those deaths were from opioids. Opioids are central nervous system depressants, so high doses can lead to respiratory depression. In short, you stop breathing and you nod off for eternity. Another major issue is the new synthetic opioid called fentanyl. It's about 50 times stronger than heroin and much cheaper to make. Just 2 milligrams can be lethal. Carfentanil, also a synthetic, is 100 times stronger than fentanyl. In the USA, 36,359 died from fentanyl overdoses in 2019. Over the next few years, it went up to 56,516, 70,601, and 73,838. Even scarier is the fact that authorities have found cocaine that has been contaminated with fentanyl. Traces have also been discovered in methamphetamine, MDMA, and fake prescription pills. The latter are often brand names such as OxyContin, Percocet, and Xanax, which were previously sometimes overprescribed to the American public by pharmaceutical giants and physicians. Such pills are in high demand, so criminals make counterfeit versions. Fentanyl's led to a new wave of overdose deaths in the U.S. A doctor explained to ABC News, "We think of it like waves, and with the first wave being prescription opioids, the second wave being heroin, the third wave being fentanyl, and this fourth wave is fentanyl with stimulants." Over 650,000 Americans have died in the opioid crisis since it began in the 1990s, and it doesn't look like things are about to improve. The waves are a tsunami of death and misery washing over America. Not helping things is the way pharmaceutical companies cleverly and sometimes insidiously marketed pain pills and put the heroin equivalents in nice boxes, which led to the use of opiates taking off in the USA among regular folks who never dreamed they'd essentially one day become junkies. Purdue Pharma, the maker of OxyContin, is the company that springs to mind, but there are various kinds of so-called heroin pills made by multiple firms. Some of these companies wrongly said such pain pills were not very addictive, basing this on no credible evidence whatsoever. Heroin and other opiates, as it turns out, are highly addictive, but they were being treated like essential oils. It's not surprising then that the US Department of Health once famously said the United States makes up 4.4% of the world's population and consumes over 80% of the world's opioids. The US government cracked down after certain companies were exposed for essentially pushing drugs like heroin on the public. But many of the addicts this created were already hooked, so they went to the streets. In 2018, a study said that 75% of Americans who used opioids recreationally had started their drug-taking careers with legitimate prescriptions. There are stories of elderly people getting hooked on prescriptions, and when told the prescriptions were no longer available, they went out into the mean streets and scored bags of dope from people they'd never dream of meeting. Grannies of suburbia who'd never even smoked weed because they believed taking drugs was immoral or dangerous were now mixing with drug-peddling street gangs. It was eternally embarrassing for them, but heroin was that addictive. As we said, everything heroin gives you, all that warmth and courage and not giving a damn, will usually make you pay back tenfold. It's so addictive that it requires all your energy and time. You can't live without it. You can't travel without it. It becomes your ball and chain. You can become utterly selfish in your devotion to your high, someone you never imagined could exist. You might start constantly to lie. You might even steal. It can take everything you love away, and all the time it becomes less and less effective until you need it just to feel normal. Indeed, heroin is the epitome of the Faustian bargain, the deal with the devil. Abandon hope, all ye who enter here, should be embossed on the back of every opiate pill and brick of brown tar smack or China white heroin in existence. Once addicted, most recreational users often can't get enough of it. They do desperate things to get it. They don't care of their health. Many inject it, which at some point will likely cause an injury. They often inject stuff mixed with impurities. They shoot up evil combos designed to be stronger and so are much more lethal. Welcome to the American nightmare we mentioned at the beginning of this video. These so-called zombies in the streets are people who've likely taken heroin or fentanyl combined with a drug called xylazine. Xylazine, known on the streets as tranq, is actually for horses, seriously, and other animals too. It's a legitimate veterinary tranquilizer often used as a sedative. A paper in Science Direct explained, its primary goal is to calm down animals undergoing medical procedures or testing while minimizing their suffering. There was some testing on humans as a potential sedative, a painkiller, or an anesthetic, but the FDA put up a red light because of its effects on the central nervous system. It's good for pigs, but not for people, was the FDA's decision. Because it's never been approved for humans, this means drugs to counteract its toxicity in humans have never been created, and neither have ones to treat addiction to it. The zombie drug, therefore, is a fairly unknown entity in the world of human drug taking. We do know that injection sites can turn into ulcers, and if the ulcers aren't treated, they can turn into holes, and the holes can become infected, and so on until the limb is completely ruined. If you want a formal explanation, the study we just mentioned said, the mechanism by which xylazine causes skin wounds is not well understood, and wounds have been reported beyond the sites of local injection. It has been postulated that the pathogenesis involves peripheral vasoconstriction from A2 receptor activation. That means that the blood vessels become constricted, and so the affected area doesn't get enough blood, which can lead to the tissue dying. There's also been an increase in xylazine fatal overdoses. The CDC said they went up 30% from 2019 to 2020. In 2021, xylazine was said to have been a factor in 3,468 U.S. deaths, 73% of them men. It's when it's mixed with fentanyl, though, that it becomes really dangerous. More bad news is traditional opioid antagonists like Narcan, which can bring someone out of an opiate overdose, doesn't work on xylazine. There couldn't be a worse combo than fentanyl and xylazine. But xylazine is strong by itself. In a study in 2023, xylazine was found in drug samples in 36 states. First, fentanyl kicked heroin off the streets, and then sometime around 2020, xylazine arrived on the scene and rendered the already strong bag of fentanyl even stronger. The Department of Justice has partly blamed Chinese gangs. Writing in 2023, DEA has seized xylazine fentanyl mixtures in 48 of 50 states and in Washington, D.C. We know where the xylazine comes from. It comes as powder from China and as a liquid diverted from veterinary supply chains. A DEA report said, a kilogram of xylazine powder can be purchased online from Chinese suppliers with common prices ranging from $6 to $20 per kilogram. At this low of a price, Its use as an adulterant might increase the profit for illicit drug traffickers, as its psychoactive effects allow them to reduce the amount of fentanyl or heroin used in the mixture. The Chinese suppliers don't sell directly to the US. The finished drugs or precursors usually go to Mexico and then across the border. Even so, the demand for regular narcotics in the US is there, and it has been there for a long time. China didn't create the prescription opioid crisis, American companies did. Still, it's not helping the US that Chinese fentanyl and xylazine have hit the shores. According to the National Center for Drug Abuse Statistics, around 10 million American adults abuse opioids at least once a year, or about 3.8% of the entire population, and this number doesn't include people who use opioids as prescribed. The Brookings Institute wrote in 2023, an estimated 12.6% of the U.S. workforce receives an opioid prescription each year, and 75% of employers surveyed by the National Safety Council report that they have been directly affected by opioids. The global pharmaceutical market has seen massive growth during the past 20 years, with revenues worldwide totaling around $1.48 trillion in 2022. And now we have fake pain meds coming to the US via China or Mexico, pretending to be the legal ones that so many addicts dearly want. Had those glitzy marketing campaigns for opioids never been a thing, it's hard to imagine the counterfeit explosion would have happened. Now you need to watch Real Reason Fentanyl is So Deadly, or check out this other video instead.